Bring in former CIA Director John Brennan. He has worked for 6 U.S. presidents, both Republican and Democrat, and is now an NBC News national security analyst. Director Brennan, good morning.
Good morning, Savannah.
You had very strong words. You said this was treasonous. And when I look at the press conference and I see what happened with President Trump, I go back to a child of the 80s, you know, when President Reagan stood up to Mikhail Gorbachev and stood up to Russia. And here was an opportunity where the president was given that chance and didn't take up America's side. Is that how you see it?
Absolutely. He was given the chance on the world stage to state very clearly that Russia interfered in our election and to say that it's intolerable and this shall not happen again. But he didn't. He sided with Mr. Putin.
But he also blamed the U.S.
He did. And I'm glad that the press was asking him questions about what do you hold, Russia accountable for. And right away he pivoted back to Hillary Clinton, the election. And so he continued to castigate and criticize American citizens, American institutions, and the U.S. intelligence community. I mean, that is outrageous.
What does that do for Vladimir Putin? Because I saw his interview with Chris Wallace of Fox News afterward. He looked like a guy who had just had a very satisfying lunch. I mean, he was smiling, he was relaxed, he was jovial. The foreign minister of Russia says it was better than super, this meeting. What does that do for Russia?
Well, I think it just emboldens Putin to do what he has done for some time, try to influence the politics and developments in other countries. We've only seen the press conference. We didn't see Mr. Trump's performance in the meeting with the Russians, nor in the one-on-one for 2 hours. What did Mr. Trump talk to President Putin about? I have no idea. I'm certainly concerned about what might have been discussed there, shared. Did he discuss about U.S. intelligence capabilities? Did he further denigrate the FBI and the CIA and others? So when I use the term, this is nothing short of treasonous, I equate it to the betrayal of one's nation, basically aiding and abetting, giving comfort to an enemy. Mr. Trump had the opportunity to say clearly to the American people and to countries around the world and to Mr. Putin, do not do this again or there will be consequences. And he failed to meet even the minimum standards of that.
What about him saying, I talked to Putin, I've heard what our intelligence agents say, but I talked to Putin and his denials were really strong?
Yes, and I have said publicly, the Russians feign sincerity better than any other peoples I know. And Putin is a very trained intelligence officer. His KGB past, I think, is coming forward. And so I'm sure he gave a very persuasive articulation of why Russia didn't do it. And, Mr. Trump says at the press conference, I don't know why they would do it. Well, come on. Are you not reading your intelligence papers, the President's Daily Brief? You're not listening to Dan Coates, and thankfully the Director of National Intelligence stood up and stood behind the women and men of the intelligence community.
Isn't it, though, that the president feels that to acknowledge Russia's involvement and attempts to meddle in the election is tantamount to saying, I wasn't elected legitimately? Don't you think that's what's motivating all of this?
He's conflating a lot of things. I think he's conflating the charges of collusion. Well, unfortunately, I think we see very overt and public collusion between Mr. Trump and President Putin of Russia. And I think he's very concerned that if he gives any credence to the intelligence community assessment, it undermines his legitimacy. And I think his paranoia, his narcissism just comes out. And that's why he lashes out and he continues to focus on his election and how he won.
I mentioned you worked in intelligence for under 6 presidents. What did you think when you saw President Putin's denial of whether he had any compromising information on President Trump?
It's what I've heard from Russian officials, Russian intelligence over the years, which is they deny, deny, deny. And that's fine. He's going to do that. He's not going to acknowledge publicly what they did. But that doesn't mean that Mr. Trump shouldn't hold him to account and say, yes, you did. We need to move on. We need to have better relations between Moscow and Washington. And I very much hope that we're going to get there. But we cannot give Putin a pass, whether it be on interference in our election, on Crimea, and other things. And that's what Mr. Trump is doing. And that's why the outrage on both sides of the aisles is so vehement now. And I'm hoping that Mr. Trump is going to understand exactly the seriousness and gravity of this.
Do you think there should be resignations? People who work for the president right now?
I think so. Or people who are going to decide to leave the Republican Party. He is the titular head of the Republican Party. And if this is what the Republican Party is, it's not the party of Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush and others throughout the years who really, I think, tried to do everything possible to keep this country strong and safe. When I was listening to Mr. Trump's press conference, the words of Ronald Reagan, "Bring down that wall, Mr. Gorbachev," were ringing in my ears. And I'm sure Ronald Reagan, listening to what Mr. Trump was saying, could not believe it and is rolling over right now, unfortunately, in his grave.
Former CIA Director John Brennan, thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Hello, Today fans. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking that button down there and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives.